Who do we think we are? A historical perspective on Christian nationalism. What is nationalism? And what role is Christianity supposed to play in our society and in our global community here? And I'm just going to zoom in because I've got a bunch of information on my slides and I want to give you a view of them. And we'll just talk about I want to first talk about what nationalism is. I realize that the most boring way to start a topic is to start by defining terms. So I'm going to apologize for that. And yet I do find these definitions fascinating personally. Maybe it's the nerdiness in me, but we all know what we're talking about when we talk about nationalism or Christian nationalism. But when we get into arguments about whether this is a good thing or a bad thing, whether it's proper for it to take a role in American public life and to be an influence on global politics, then it's important to make sure when we're going to argue about things that we're talking about the same thing. And that's my excuse for starting with some definitions. I want to talk about nationalism. I want to talk about religion and its role in our identity, and then talk about what happens when we put them together. So nationalism is, in an academic sense, kind of a modern thing. It's usually traced to the American Revolution and the French Revolution, sometime around that era. Not to say that there wasn't a sense of internal identity, that we didn't have people proud of their governments before this, but nationalism in the form that we know it has been a slow developing thing that means something very specific, and this is a more modern thing. Right. In fact, history starts with an empire model. I shouldn't say history starts. This is very inaccurate. But nevertheless, we come from societies with an empire model. I've put a picture here showing the overlap of the Assyrian Empire, the Neo-Babylonian Empire, and finally the Persian Empire in red. They've called it the Achaemenid Empire. That's just the Persian Empire. And you notice something about these empires, that they're different in their boundaries, and yet there's at least some of the space which is included in all of that. And I wanted to point out the fact that an empire is not a unified single culture and single identity. You have conquerors who come through and take over territory, and maybe the elite learn a new language for trade, and we do things a certain way. But for most people, things haven't changed. Their culture and their identity has been locally defined and continues to be locally defined, and their communities will switch from one empire to another and still be mostly themselves. Empires are created by force. They're created from the outside, and they create an imposed identity that takes a whole bunch of people who are different from one another and says, you're now all one group, and we're going to work together. And we do the best we can, but it is not an internal or an intrinsic identity. The empire model is fairly common in Afro-Eurasia, until we come to the modern era. In fact, actually, instead of national identity, in Europe at least, religious identity turns out to be more important to people, more significant. And in fact, I had thought about putting an interim model called Christendom, but we'll get there. Anyway, so the American Revolution and the French Revolution come out with this idea that people have intrinsic rights. They shift from the model of a political body being formed from the top down by the strength of the empire and define it as being created by the consent of the governed, or, of course, in the case of the revolution, the withdrawal of consent. Because the people now create this new entity that we're going to call the nation, the people get to determine what it's like, and this is going to be based on their internal characteristics. So nationalism comes after the empire model. Of course, the ages overlap. It's not a thing that goes worldwide in a decade. It takes hundreds of years. And of course, colonized nations are the last ones to win this independence and identity. But the American Revolution and the French Revolution are really visible markers at its beginning here. The government's legitimacy doesn't come from the external force it can use. It comes from the internal consent. And over time, the big empires will break up. Things like the Austro-Hungarian Empire and the Ottoman Empire at the end of World War I. And people ask, how do we draw the lines between countries? The new popular idea is that you need to draw them around natural people groups. This will be people who speak the same language or have the same culture or religion, and those are fairly similar concepts here. Sometimes you've got a group with different languages, but they've got a shared history sufficient to create an identity. And this will lead to the idea of combining as well as separating, like when Germany or Italy become united countries before World War I. As the Austria-Hungarian Empire is breaking up at the end of World War I, President Wilson proposes this formally. Every nation should be based on their internal identity. And of course, it's only going to get applied in European nations, and Britain and France are going to carve up the Ottoman Empire and add them to their colonies. So we've got a definite double standard, but colonized spaces are also going to latch on to the idea that government is legitimate by the authority of the people inside it, and independent people, people groups belong to one another and have the right to form their own independent nations. All right, so this is the idea of what a nation is. It's an internally linked group of people. It implies that we have an internal unity. We have things in common, so we have shared values. It creates an in-group, a we belong together group. I went searching the internet for a picture for in-groups and came up with this one. It's about as innocuous as I can find for it. This one's based on superheroes, clearly. Now, we can argue whether nationalism and the in-groups it creates are good or bad. Benedict Anderson, the author of Imagined Communities, who talks about where the idea comes from, says that, oh, it's got a bad reputation, but nationalism is really good because it makes people do selfless things, he says, like they sacrifice their lives for their country. This is actually kind of what the bargain of citizenship is. You give people certain rights. You have rights as a citizen, and we assume that they belong to you intrinsically, not because the government said so, so the government can't take them away. The trade-off is that now it's expected you're going to be willing to fight for this community, your country. But patriotism doesn't just mean throwing yourself on a grenade, self-sacrifice, because if you're going to fight for the community, it means you're going to fight against other communities. So nationalism says we belong together. That's great. The flip side is some people don't belong. And the more specific we get about what our common values are, the more people we keep out. Because if being an Indian citizen means you're Hindu, then Muslims in India aren't really in, are they? Or if being American means speaking English or having a traditional family or valuing rugged individualism, then a lot of people, not just on the outside, but right in the country, don't make the cut. And by that definition, shouldn't get the same influence. These people can decide they want to become like us, but they can't expand the definition of who we are. Okay, there's the conundrum of nationalism. Creates an in-group, yay, creates out-groups as a natural result of it. Let's talk about religion. I want to talk about religion briefly, I'll try and be more brief. I realize I'm taking too much time and we got to get to more significant stuff here. But I do want to take a look from the outside at religion just a bit before we talk about Christianity and its place in US history. I did teach psychology of religion. I teach world religions, and I used to teach psychology of religion when they needed someone to fill it. I didn't teach it because I knew so much about it, but I learned a lot about it because I taught it. And first thing I learned was that it's really hard to study religion apart from culture. In fact, it's really late in human history that we start to make religion a separate study from culture, because it's connected to so many things about our culture. It's got its hands in metaphysics. What is the universe made of? Usually it's religion that tells us that as much or more than science. How does it work? Our ideas about law, science, human relationships, what's real, what's important. Culture and religion are kind of like the chicken and the egg thing. You can't really say, okay, we started with this and that created the other one. And because of this, most religions in the world are ethnic religions, not because they're tied to one genetic code, but because they're tied to a specific culture. So most world religions do not get up and transplant from one culture into another very easily. The exception, of course, well, Christianity is one of them. There are three missionary religions. That's Christianity, Islam, and Buddhism. These are religions that specifically and intentionally cross cultural boundaries. It is possible to convert into one of the other world religions that isn't a missionary religion, but it's not so common, and it is hard to translate over. And this is why African Christianity is not a copy of European Christianity or Indian Christianity or Asian. And one of the functions of religion is to create an identity. Psychology of religion has this whole list of what religion does psychologically for people. It provides meaning system, helps us interpret the things we experience, a purpose, or ethics, morality, and identity. And identity can mean like it's a function of your worldview because you live in this great big story that your religion or some other meaning system spells out for you. And now you have a role to play in the story. You're one of the characters and you know what you're supposed to do in life. Another way it provides identity is by giving you a group to belong to. It provides a community. These are my people. We have the same values and the same mission. Like nationalism, it's good. Now, human beings need to have community, and we need not just to, have somebody to hold hands with, but somebody to care about the same stuff with us. But again, every in-group is going to create out-groups. And just like in Christianity, just like in being American, this is an imagined community. I have not met all the other Christians in the world, just like I haven't met all the other Americans. So I have to assume some things about them based on the ones that I know. And again, I may form a fairly narrow view of what that means. So if you take the name Christian, but you don't fit my mental picture of what Christianity is, then you're not really in. And of course, this is why I titled the presentation, Who Do We Think We Are? Because this is a fundamental question. Christianity, nationalism, and when they come together to create a specific identity that we want to assign to all Christians in our space or all Americans in America, it's a question of not so much our policy, but our internal identity. Who do we believe we are? And therefore, who do we believe is in this group and deserves to get a say in what we believe and what we do? Okay, so both of these are sources of identity, and both of them are means of exclusion. And I want to point out that both of them can be markers of ethnicity, because unfortunate as it is, like most of our other fundamental social conversations, racism has a place in this one, and we don't always like to admit it, but it's a real thing, because both national identity and religion become markers of one's ethnicity or race. Okay, well, that is the mental model part. However, there are also political models. Religion and government have all kinds of different relationships, and there is not one model or another model. There's a whole continuum, a whole spectrum of possibilities here. By the way, the picture here is the Turku Cathedral, which is the most important cathedral for the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Finland, which is the state church of Finland. About 65% of the population, at least at the time I got that statistic, were members. Right now, it functions more as a culturally unifying force, a piece of heritage, and has some role in public ceremony. However, membership is no longer required, and the church doesn't play a role in the legislature. And these are all important questions about what role religion plays. So there are lots of models, and even within these models, there's a sliding scale of what role the church plays. This is an official religion, the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Finland, and yet its role is limited. It doesn't end up taking, say, a legislative role. We have official religions. There are also government-favored religions. That means that it hasn't been formally adopted as the state church. However, one or even a few churches may get a certain protected legal status and get some, say, financial favors. There's the civil religion model. This is where the US is generally believed to fall. This is where we have a generally religious atmosphere, but instead of adopting a specific church or a specific entity, it's more of a generalized or generic use of religious language in public functions. And finally, we have some outright secular states. Right now, India is considered a secular state. Of course, Narendra Modi is pushing for a stronger Hindu identity, and because it is a democracy, people get to vote about how the government is run. It may actually change. I don't know. Within these models, there is also a sliding scale of what role the church plays. It may be a symbol or a marker of their cultural heritage, their history, which is more like the role that the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Finland plays. It may play a ceremonial role. So we've got church officials taking part in government functions, but ceremonially, or the church may have a say in the legislative process and may get to determine either directly or indirectly what the laws turn out to be. In most officially Muslim countries, this would be the role that it plays. In certain countries in South America, the Catholic Church has been allowed to play that role at times in the past. Most nations are going for a more secular model, but this is still among the possibilities. Like I said, the US is said to have a civil religion. There is no state church, and yet we have a long tradition of religious language. In the past, specifically Christian, but it has broadened and has been more generically theistic in our official functions, trying to keep a separation and yet a positive relationship there. And the result is generally a generic religious culture here. So the US civil religion will embrace at its outset generic Protestant values. It's going more generic theistic, depending on who's actually in office. However, religion has no official voice in the government because, well, because of some choices made at the founding of the nation, and also because we have a religiously diverse voting public. All right, so some fundamental questions we've got to ask now. I want to point out, first of all, that there are two ways to define Christian nationalism. There's cultural Christian nationalism and there's formal Christian nationalism. And I'm not actually in favor of either one, but it's important to keep them clear when we're having conversations about faith and politics and what we should do. The first one says, culturally, we're going to define American as being Christian. And generally, those favoring that are going to have a certain kind of Christianity in mind when they say Christian. It is going to be a European descended, white majority culture, Protestant conservative Christianity, right? Well, that's one level or one way to talk about Christian nationalism. The other way would be formal Christian nationalism, and this is a concern currently in US government. That is the question about giving legal privileges or political power to Christianity, either to churches or individuals or organizations. Like, how do we define freedom of speech? This is, do we define it in such a way that we give the majority religious group power to discriminate against minority groups because we're giving favored status to Christianity? All right. And from this, we get two questions. On the cultural level, how does the majority religion relate to the minority? If we're going to define American culture by a certain brand of Christianity, what does that do for everybody else? And on the formal sense, how's the government going to relate to the majority religion? And by extent, then how do they relate to the minorities? Okay. So my renewed, my edited promise was to give you a historical overview. And this is the stuff I think that I'm best qualified to tell you about American Christianity. I want to put this conversation in perspective because history always comes up when we're talking about what role should Christianity play in US politics. And of course, US politics impact everybody else in the world. I'm sorry for that. Is the United States supposed to be a Christian nation? We had a Supreme Court case in 1906 or something, where a Supreme Court justice said it was. Does that make it so? The fact that it is specifically written out of the Constitution, does this mean it's not? I need to take a moment. Going to show my face for a moment and say, as a history professor, we're probably asking the wrong questions. It's unfair to try and make history make decisions about now. The people in the past were facing different circumstances and they were asking different questions. So the answers they give are not going to fix today's problems. They were just trying to take care of yesterday's problems. However, if we're going to have part of the, inevitably we do talk about the past to try to find answers for the present. So we should at least have a fairly clear view of the past, so we know what we're talking about. How's that? Okay. I've said that there are at least 4 roots of US Christianity. We have colonies popping up along the East Coast. We've got a bunch of different strains of Christianity, different denominations, most of them Protestant at the founding, but a lot of different ways to approach it. And all of these mix together to create the brand new nation and set the tone for how it's going to relate to religion here. So the first root I want to talk about is Puritanism. Puritanism comes out of the Calvinist tradition. These are the conservative end of the Reformation in England. And as Calvinists, they are going to come to to what's going to become the United States at the time when their group falls out of favor and they are looking to be able to make a space for themselves. So they start a colonial company. They come out to Maine, and on the northern seaboard, we get this community here. Now, Calvin says, back in his time in Geneva, that one of the roles of the government is to support the true faith. This is going to be unlike Luther, unlike the Radical Reformation. He's going to have a nice, happy mix of church and state, and says that church is predominant and the state should serve it. So these Puritans come out wanting not exactly religious freedom the way we talk about it now, but the freedom for their religion. What they want is a holy commonwealth. And in fact, Calvinism in the 17th century is going to see itself as one body. Calvinists across Europe, they see themselves as the new Israel. These are the holy of the holy, and the English Calvinists were going to see themselves as the center of that new Israel. So they're looking for this new Canaan, and when they come to colonize in the Western Hemisphere, they see North America as being a new Canaan, and of course, by extension, they have a tendency to see indigenous people as the new Philistines, the new Canaanites that are supposed to be driven out. Okay, if North America is the new Canaan, then we need to create a new Israel here, and we're going to have a covenant relationship with God. God, just like with Israel in the Old Testament, is going to bless us if we're good and faithful to him and keep his law. If we are unfaithful, we're going to be a target of God's special disfavor, and God will punish us to get our attention and send hardships so that we will straighten up. For Puritanism, then the most important standard of government is if it is going to be obeying God's law. It's not about democracy or individual freedom of conscience. It's about the community being faithful. Now, this may be a bit caricaturing. Puritanism is going to have variety in it, just like every other group, but this idea is going to be there, and it is going to affect not just the United States in the past, but in the present. I can remember some natural disasters or even man-made disasters happening in our country, and having significant preachers go on television and say, this is God punishing us. We shouldn't be allowing this sin or that sin, and God's trying to bring us back in line. I didn't like the theology, but if I were from this tradition, it would probably make sense. Okay, matching and opposing that view is a smaller view that embraces religious pluralism. There are calls for religious freedom, separating church and state, and these are largely for practical purposes. For one thing, we have this briefly created Catholic space in Maryland. This is by, the English king is trying to appease all the different factions in England, creates a Catholic colony, but Maryland, just like everybody else, needs people to move in and is the minority view. And so we have religious freedom offered in Maryland so that people will move there so that we can keep up the economy, right? New York, etc., tolerant for reasons of trade and business. Then you have some that are religiously tolerant because of their underlying philosophy. Rhode Island is founded by communities created by Anne Hutchinson, who's in this picture, and also by Roger Williams, who will create a Baptist congregation there. But both of them are going to explicitly teach that human beings are supposed to make their own independent religious choices, and that's what God wants for us. The most successful, the largest, is going to be Pennsylvania. William Penn is a Quaker. He's going to not just receive the land as a grant from the English king, he's also going to attempt to purchase it, of course, according to European standards of purchase, from Native American populations there, and tries to be intentionally inclusive. Now, the Quakers don't dominate Pennsylvania, but Pennsylvania will try to be intentionally inclusive based on William Penn's principles. That's two of them. The third one comes in the South, what will eventually develop into a culture of the American South as we know it today. These are large agricultural communities, and slavery is going to be quickly adopted as a way to make agriculture pay off. You've got labor-intensive crops like cotton. You've got to ship things over across the Atlantic Ocean, and so you've got to make that pay off. Because places like Virginia, South Carolina, these places will embrace slavery, it's going to alter the religious nature of these spaces. Embracing slavery naturally erodes the conscience, but Christianity isn't kicked out. Instead, Christianity is going to be much more formal and authority-based. The southern colonies and eventually the southern US will again be diverse. I don't want to take a whole region of my nation and toss it in this category of not being religiously sincere. But Christianity is going to be favored if it can support authority, human hierarchy structures. Eventually, we'll get to the Civil War. By the time we get to the Civil War, and the North and the South are in conflict, the Christian faith is the center of the conversation about slavery, and Southern theologians will say, no, the Bible actually teaches human hierarchy, and that slavery and everybody being kept in their place and having an authority structure and an order is God's way. And you who want to get rid of slavery are actually the ones who are throwing out the authority of Scripture. Of course, after the Civil War, we'll have the lost cause theology as the explanation of why did the South lose the war is also going to be answered religiously. But again, it's going to be, we didn't embrace propriety and authority well enough, so we've got to be more pious. This is where we get that. Jamar Tisby, in his book The Color of Compromise, calls it the cult of chivalry, where we've got to protect women and we've got to keep segregation, and we just need to keep everything in order and do things properly, and to have good manners is more important than equality, or more Christian than equality. I should also note that even before the founding of the United States, when we had Caribbean islands producing sugar, before we had really solid categories for race, when we didn't have black and white, people would write about the demographic groups and they would refer to them as Christian or slave. So eventually the group called Christian, is called white and the other is black, but you've got this association of Christianity with Europeans. And of course, what's proper Christianity is going to be that European or that white form of it. All right, last of all, I want to mention the progressive class in the Eastern Seaboard. These are the rationalists. Rationalism also gets its founding back. It's kind of a reaction to the the horrible bloody wars of religion that happen in the late 1600s and so on. We've got things like the 30 Years' War and just decimating populations. And people say, you know what, maybe being really rigid about religious dogma isn't good for us after all. What if we could just all agree? Rationalism says that we should found our religion based on general revelation, or the ideas that are common to all of us, based on the world that we see around us and our own human reason. We have these doctrines. This is the religion that makes sense. So we're trying to form a universal religion. And of course, this is going to become less and less religious, or at least less and less specifically Christian, or less related to the Bible. As we do this, as we move away from special revelation. The most famous, especially among Adventist circles, would be deism. Deism says we've got a kind of impartial God who's a God of creation, but doesn't intervene in human experience here. This is, again, trying to create a universal religion from general revelation. We'll also have groups that say, the universalists, that say, well, everybody's going to be saved because that makes the most sense. Now, I don't want to say that the intellectuals are the good guys. That's very, college teacher of me, I suppose. That's my bias, right? But they do come up with a really practical arrangement, and that is keeping a deliberate space. They'll use religious moral values to get support in the revolution. By the time we get to war, we've got a bunch of Christian preachers saying that the revolution is actually God's will, because this idea of civil and religious liberty, this follows God's character. So we've got a really happy relationship with organized religion, but the rationalists are going to say, let's keep them in separate spaces here. And this is what we get. The United States ends up with a civil religion. We start out with the Constitution. In the First Amendment, the Constitution forbids a partnership between the government and religion. And we've got two parts of that, the Establishment and the Free Exercise Clause. So the Establishment Clause says that Congress shall make no law with respect to any religion. And the Free Exercise Clause says nor prohibit the free exercise thereof. So Congress cannot establish religion, and they cannot prevent religion. Essentially, we don't want the church to control the government, and we don't want the government to suppress the church. And keeping these two in balance, of course, is a clever trick, and we keep trying it through all our generations. And where exactly the line is drawn, where we're violating establishment or violating free exercise, varies based on what judge is deciding the case, unfortunately, but we try and keep a balance here. We have the wall of separation, we call it. But of course, we can never have a perfect separation, because when we make moral choices as a community, when we as a nation decide what's right and wrong and put it into law, our ideas of right and wrong have been formed by our religious backgrounds, our religious convictions. Going the other direction, we also cannot keep the government completely out of religious business, because when I have a conviction and I act on it, then my act can impact other people. When it impacts other people sufficiently, then it becomes the government's business, because it's the government's job to protect those other citizens. So there are legitimate limits the government can put on our free exercise, and there's certainly a limit to how much we can keep religion out of the making of laws as well. Nevertheless, we try and keep separate spaces so we can be happy neighbors, that is, religion and government. As I said, we have got a positive informal relationship. We had religious support for the American Revolution. Many said that representative democracy and freedom of conscience were God's will for human beings, and therefore this new nation was also God's will, and God was specifically in this endeavor. And that's why the United States, or the soon to become United States, won and not England. Because we've got this positive relationship, we also have a bunch of religious imagery in political speeches and in public life there. We can question the intent. Do our founders talk a lot in religious language because they're really religious? Or do they talk in religious language because that's the language they have available to them, or that's the language their hearers will respond to? Don't know. But we get this general idea. Notice I've mentioned 4 different strains. All of these people would consider themselves Christian, but what they mean by it is quite different. And we've got numerous denominations. And to these people, it feels like we're very religiously diverse. And this is why we get not a Christian nation, but a generic sort of Protestant morality going on that isn't really endorsing one church or one denomination. That's the founding. And then the challenges start coming. By the way, I did not pay enough attention to the time here. Can I interrupt myself and ask about time?
Oh, take your time. We are locked in and listening. Just keep going.
Technically, when was I technically supposed to be done, though? I just want to know how much I'm trespassing on.
Okay, in another like 10-15 minutes. But okay. It's up to you. Yeah.
Okay. I may go over that, but I'm going to try to stay within the 15. All right, some challenges. The U.S. civil religion gets challenged almost immediately. Keep in mind that these brand new states had their own governance. They've got their own ideas, so they're not all really hip on being non-sectarian necessarily, especially in Puritan spaces. Then we've got the Second Great Awakening that comes along, and suddenly we've got new religious groups getting more traction, specifically the Baptists and the Methodists, and they seem threatening to the Congregationalists, the Presbyterians, and the Episcopalians who've been around for a while. So there's actually some attempt by the older groups to get their local governments to give them a legal advantage over the others. It gets some traction, but for the most part, the governments are unwilling to listen. Then as we go on in the early 20th century, the immigration patterns shift. And more people are coming to the United States, the new United States, from Southern European nations, poorer nations, like Italy, also from Ireland, and many of these are Catholic. Well, we've had such a history of conflict between the Protestant groups and Catholicism back in Europe that this sounds really threatening to the people who were, the Christians who are already here. Protestants will tend to see them as the enemy. And of course, they're going to be very culturally different. They're poorer, they'll have larger families. And there's even a fear that we're going to have a cultural takeover, or they may be unsafe neighbors. We have people writing to say that this is bad because Catholic believers owe their allegiance to the Pope, and they won't be good and true Americans because of that. So we've got religious prejudice and social and ethnic prejudice going on. And by the way, the sense that there was a strong ethnic difference between Northern Europeans and Southern Europeans at this time was pretty pronounced. You can see some anti-immigration propaganda from that time period. And honestly, if you didn't know when it was from, you would think that these were racist caricatures of people immigrating to the US from South America and Central America, and they're not. It's about Italian immigrants. Anyway, so we got a mix of these racial, social, and religious prejudices. However, Catholic immigrants are going to argue that it's actually an important American value to accept religious diversity, freedom of conscience, and therefore they belong as much as anybody else. Likewise, with Jewish immigrants, this is going to happen more as anti-Semitic persecution ramps up, particularly in Eastern Europe, and that's going to happen. It's going to come to its peak, around the time of both world wars. There'll be a huge influx of Jewish immigrants, and this is even a greater stretch to the definition of our civil religion. But Jewish immigrants, like Catholic immigrants, are both going to adopt traditional American rhetoric and say freedom of conscience is an important an important American value. This space cannot be truly American if it doesn't accept us. So while we definitely have strong nativist, anti-immigrant movements going on in US politics, the second generation, the 1920s KKK, is extremely anti-immigrant, anti-Catholic, anti-Jewish. However, eventually the cultural concept of our civil religion is going to be expanded. So we go from specifically Christian prayers given at the start of legislative sessions to generically theistic ones. Nativism is going to stick around and pop back up from here and there. That is, it's going to get some traction in the political scene sometimes. And of course, we're seeing it coming around again, and we're talking about it now, but it's not a new thing. Nevertheless, in the past, the US has generally tried to stretch the concept of their civil religion to include newcomers. All right. What about the argument that we are, in fact, an explicitly Christian nation? That Protestant Christianity is an important part of the identity of the founders of our nation, and therefore is still an important part of our identity as a nation. And other people need to conform, or at least their religious preferences need to take a second-class status. They'll take a back seat to Protestant Christianity because of this. Well, the idea of the United States being explicitly and intentionally a Christian nation dates from about the early 19th century. You start to see we're a Christian nation rhetoric showing up around this time. And this is a time of westward expansion. The Christian identity is useful because we're a nation with this short history, no unifying culture. So this narrative gives a sense that we were meant to be, intended by God. We have a purpose in the world and a right to exist. And it's especially useful for westward expansion because it's this, you've heard of the manifest destiny, the idea that it is the responsibility of these white Protestant Christian Americans to expand across the continent and contain all of this space and develop it and such. So the Christian nation identity is really helpful in encouraging this. It kind of recedes a bit, and it shows up again in different times when there are certain conflicts going in. My apologies. I swallowed wrong. All right. Well, you can see on your screen, after the Civil War, you've got the US South, the former Confederacy, trying to explain why they lost the war. You get this lost cause idea. And Southern politicians are going to push this Christian view and chivalry and law and authority in law and order as part of their argument against Reconstruction and the federal government's efforts there, because it's upsetting not just to their political structures, but to the structures, the social hierarchy that they had justified based on religious interpretations. Shows up again in the Great Depression. You have FDR and his New Deal reforms coming in. He's supportive of unions, the rights of workers. Women actually get social advances during this time too. The capitalists who hold the money are going to be pushing the "we're a Christian nation" sort of narrative, because this helps to justify you shouldn't criticize America. We don't have to change. We're something intended by God, so we get to stay who we are. So it comes out in an economic conflict here. The rhetoric ramps up again after World War II. The US feels extremely threatened by Russia and by communism. Feels like communism is attempting to infiltrate and change our political systems. Communists are generally seen as atheists, and therefore we're going to really push and stress in the 1950s the religious nature of the nation. We also tend to have kind of a conservative swing after each of the world wars in the US, where we've got some prosperity and we go back to conservative politics. But this is where we get things like "In God We Trust" added to the money, and "One Nation Under God" added to the Pledge of Allegiance and stuff. And we're pushing the Christian nature of our nation against atheism and communism that's considered a kind of self-defense. And it comes up again in the civil rights movement. Again, we're a Christian nation, so why are you criticizing us? These people are simply trying to tear down our good and blessed by God nation by tearing up our social structures here. And besides, they're probably communists because they're talking about poverty too, right? So this is where it comes out in these spaces. The Christian nation issue comes up whenever we are having a cultural shakeup challenged by immigration, international conflict, economic change, or our internal conversation on civil rights. Please note that a number of these are specifically racial. And it is also a good, useful tool for covering up racist biases in our political arguments. Because race and religion are very often associated with one another, we can say that this is a religious concern rather than a racial one. Okay, coming to the end, and I've skipped over a whole bunch of content that we talked about in class, of course, but where are we in the United States? Sorry, still clearing my throat here. We've got our left and right wing politically, probably more polarized than, I, knowing US history, could say they've been, and more intentionally polarized. And the right wing is working really hard to claim the authority of the religious voice. The religious right shows up as a hoped-for voting bloc, comes around in, I think it's in the late 60s here. And the very first catalyst for trying to unite conservative Christians as a voting bloc is about segregation in private schools. Because of the civil rights movement, the US government is opposing segregation. Public spaces have to be desegregated. Private schools still have a right as private organizations to segregate. However, they will lose federal funding because the federal government is not going to support any segregated institution. The most famous case is Bob Jones University, which I believe it was somewhere in the 2000s that they finally dropped the rule against interracial dating on campus. But anyway, the point is that conservative white Christian leaders see this as a government overreach. They're they see it as an infringement on their religious liberty, and they try and rally the troops to all vote the same way in order to protect the rights of private schools to segregate. This is going to fall out of favor fairly soon. Segregation is just going to lose traction on the national scene. So the second catalyst becomes abortion. And it's interesting that in 1972, when we've got Roe versus Wade first happening, we actually didn't have a lot of evangelicals getting excited about it. The Southern Baptist Convention actually has a very moderate position on abortion. I looked at their statements. They were talking about the importance of access for therapeutic abortions and unusual circumstances and such. And of course, that's going to change. Part of this is the religious bias going on. Initially, abortion is thought of as a Catholic issue, but needing something better to rally around, and also because they start talking to one another, evangelicals begin to pick it up and to take an anti-abortion stance and to urge that Christians need to vote, and they need to vote with the Republican Party. And for decades, they need to vote with the Republican Party because of abortion. Even when no legislation about abortion is really going on, evangelicals will be becoming one-issue voters, and that issue is abortion. The formal religious right is going to start in the late 1970s. We've got a Republican strategist, Paul Weyrich, who's seen this as a great way to, pick up a lot of traction in the South. We've got somewhere in there, we've got a swap that has happened, I think, somewhere around the Nixon administration, where Republicans become strongest in the South and they switch geographically with Democrats. Today, of course, we are looking at an evangelical partnership with Donald Trump. My husband was just talking this morning about, a current Republican president saying something about this being the greatest Easter of ever, which is kind of missing the point of Easter, since it's about an event like 2,000 years ago and not this one now. But Donald Trump has run explicitly on the idea of giving special privileges and special influence in society to evangelical Christians, conservative Protestant Christians in the United States. That's the right wing. Over on the left wing, well, we are losing the religious language in the political left. There is a growth of non-religious. There's the segment of the population, sorry. If you take surveys, you see there's a growing group that will identify themselves as no religious affiliation. More and more, this group is allying with the Democratic Party. Therefore, left-wing politics is slowly dropping religious language. Candidates are less likely to talk about their Christian heritage or invoke God, because this is not playing to their entirety of their base as well as it used to be. Civil religion then is going to be claimed by the political conservatives, who are worried about immigration. They're worried about progressive values because they are worried about cultural change. Immigrant groups are going to change the ethnic demographics. Progressive policies are going to diminish the role of Christianity in our public life. I don't know if we will continue to have a US civil religion. We're coming to a space in which it feels like we're being told we have to choose either the right wing and explicitly conservative evangelical Christianity, or the left wing and having a fully secular state. I haven't come here, though, to talk about politics. It feels weird to say that. I've talked about politics the whole time. I am concerned about politics. I suspect you are too. I'm most concerned, however, about Christianity. Because of its involvement in politics, Christianity has been altered. You might recognize when we talked about the four roots that the Calvinist language, the Puritans' language about a holy commonwealth and needing to follow the law of God in order to receive God's blessing, that's part of our conversation here. Also, the whole law and order lean of from that southern, that kind of plantation theology that says we need to keep everybody in their place and we need to keep a certain authority level for the right people in America. This is also coming in. And the more Christianity gets involved in politics, the more it becomes about politics and about power. I am concerned about politics. I care about the country, but this is a democracy. Yes, it's a democratic republic. Yes, we've got all the language in there. But in a democratic system, the people choose what they want. So the nature of the United States is negotiable. What I believe shouldn't be is the nature of Christianity. I don't want to see the kind of Christianity that is going to be created when it is solely to serve a particular political agenda. I still want to follow the Christianity of Jesus, who came to free the captives, bring people out of prison, take care of the poor and needy, break the chains. This is what I want it to be. And this is the conversation I hope to have.
Thank you so much, Laura, for taking the time to walk us through history and kind of, help to bring us to where we are today. So just sharing with everyone, it is time for you to raise your hands to join the conversation. And I will recognize those hands as best as possible in the order that they're raised. So it's usually right now, I think it's in the reaction section of your screen. You click on react. One of those options will allow you to raise your hand to join the conversation. So I'm gonna get started with, you said a lot of quite salient things. And I think there really is a space for an actual democracy, even with the prevalence of Christianity being, the significant religion. But one of the things I've observed in the Caribbean, so I work for a regional organization. So we work in 16 countries. And some of the countries that we work in, we cannot go into those having a meeting without beginning with prayer. And I will say to them, I'm aware though that while I'm Christian, that we have Muslims, we have Hindus who are quite significant populations. We have Buddhists and we have atheists, and they'll say, yeah, but in this country, we begin a meeting with prayer, and I don't know, how you kind of make space for that. We have to be respectful that this is how they do things. But I'm also cognizant that, we represent a wider category of persons who do not necessarily want to be praying to the God that I would want to pray to. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
I think that's an excellent way to deal with that conundrum too, because you're recognizing the individual religious choices and the custom.
Okay. All right. Bjorn had his hand up. Oh, I think he may have dropped off the call. I'm not seeing him anymore. So Diane, I am going to ask you to unmute so you can join the conversation.
I am wondering, you have discussed Christianity in politics on the right-hand side of the spectrum, but you haven't addressed the place of Christianity on the left side of the political spectrum. We know that Black churches for a long time have been used by left side of the spectrum politicians. So how do you explain that failure in your presentation to address that?
You're very right that I have not addressed that. I've been trying to give content leading up to our current conversation, and in our current political situation, we're not getting a whole lot of religious rhetoric coming from the political left in the United States. But there is certainly a an important, a very valuable Christian left in US heritage also. And you are right that it is perhaps best represented by our Black churches. We've got an interesting mix because US Black Christianity, it may also be evangelical, is likely inclined towards civil rights and religious liberty, while practicing a fairly conservative personal morality. We also have at the same time some, say, mainline Protestant or say more liberal Lutheranism or even Catholicism, which is decidedly Christian and applies their Christian values toward things like individual liberty and caring for the poor and such, based on those traditions.
Well, and you also haven't addressed the Jewish faith and their use in politics. So maybe is your conclusion incorrect that and isn't religion just part of the overall structure of the United States, and whether it's a Christian faith or Jewish faith that's part of the whole underlying structure of the United States, and it still moves along. I mean, we still have a democracy after 200 years. We ebbs and flows. And shouldn't that really be part of your discussion?
Yeah, we definitely will always have religious motivations for our own individual choices. We are certainly going to have religious motivation for our politics, because politics is the place in which we apply our values. What kind of neighbors are we going to be to each other? What do we decide together is right or wrong? I'm not sure that concept undermines this. I do know, though, that Christianity, well, personal values of any religious group, it shifts when it is used for a strongly political purpose. And I don't want my politics to be telling me what to believe. I also know that as a community, we have to come up with a shared vision of what we want for our laws and our culture and our society. So it can't be, I have personal religious convictions that are not going to change based on what my neighbor believes. However, I need to acknowledge my neighbor in the creation of civil law for us as a community.
All right, thank you so much, Diane, for those questions. Linda, lovely to see you today. Please join the conversation.
Yes, you too, Cherry Ann. Laura, I really appreciated your presentation, and in your defense, the title did have to do with Christian nationalism. So by definition, I think your remarks have been aligned in the logical projection with your historical representation. And my question really has to do with whether or not you might believe that at the core of these cultural disagreements and the trajectory of the United States really ultimately flows back to racial issues. And the reason I ask the question that way is that, we're aware of the fact that there is, at least at some level and in some quarters, a push by very conservative groups to produce as many white babies as they can. That the role of the mother is to have one baby right after another, and perhaps in a somewhat disappointing analysis, since the overthrow of Roe v. Wade, there have been fewer abortions to some extent and more births, but most of the births are, not surprisingly, among brown and Black families because of the fact that one has to surmise that they, rich women have always been able to get abortions, okay? But it is poor women who are particularly affected by the change in the law. But again, my question flows to the idea that whatever methodologies might be employed to gain this religious domination, that the religious aspect of it is only a guise to cover up what is really racial inequity and racial injustice.
This is a very intriguing line of thought here, Linda, and you're certainly not wrong. I agree, but I want to be careful in what I say also, because definitely religion and ethnicity come to be associated with one another. And since my religious group is, as Benedict Anderson would say, an imagined community, I'm going to imagine them to be like me or like the other Christians that I know. So for the majority of white Christians, they're going to be people who look like us and believe like us. I wouldn't want to entirely explain it in terms of racial motivation, but because we've got this close association between the two of them, it is easy to overlook our own racial motivation because we're able to label it as religious.
Okay, well, thank you.
All right, thanks for that, Laura, Linda. Bjorn, welcome back. Oh, you can rejoin the conversation. So you got dropped off earlier.
Yeah, hey, so I was getting ready and I was excited to ask my question, and then my phone died on me. So I'm back, and thanks for your patience, everyone. And thank you very much, Professor Wibberding, for that fascinating presentation. I'm always in an awkward spot when I'm in the US because I sound like I'm from the US, but I'm actually Swedish, and I've got all these conflicting narratives in my head. And I remember when I first moved up to Northern California, things got much more religious in terms of how Americans expressed their national identity. I moved from Southern California to Northern California, I remember, right soon after college. And I got in trouble for not putting my hand on my heart for the Pledge of Allegiance, I remember. And I don't know, it was a very interesting cultural experience. My question is, from your view of history and the kind of the wilder and wilder swings we're seeing from election to election, how do you see this panning out, say 20 years from now? Have we doubled down on Christian identity, or have we gotten so fed up with this latest expression that we see in this presidency that we've kind of left it all behind and become a much more secular nation? What's your prediction? And right before you answer that, again, everyone, I'm going to put the fundraising link for you for the spring fundraiser before I forget that. It's my job to put that out there. But back to my question. What's the prediction for the US 20 years from now?
Oh man, as you can probably guess, I'm quite loath to make predictions, but I can tell you what I do know, because my specialty is supposed to be the past, not the future. We might talk to some sociologists for that. What I do know is that Baylor University did a study about Christian nationalism, and they were surveying attitudes, and they took a survey in 2007, and then they took another one in 2017, and they were looking for trends in Christian nationalism. And at that point, of course, we were just in the beginnings of the first Trump presidency when they took the sample. So it's unclear what happened since then, but what they saw was a drop in Christian nationalist belief. They had divided everybody into categories of people who really believed in Christian nationalism and they called them ambassadors who would like to promote it, those who were comfortable with it, but not like going to go out and share the gospel about it, those who were uncomfortable about it but tolerated, and those who were actively opposed. And they saw a shift in all four of those groups. The first two, the ambassadors and the people comfortable with it, dropped in number, and the other two rose in that 10-year span. At the same time, they also sorted out their data by age groups, and just generationally, the strongest supporters of Christian nationalism were in the older generations, and those opposed were in the younger generations. So if that were just a clear trajectory, then you could say definitely it's going down in population, and the reason that it's getting louder is because there's a sense of threat. There's a feeling like, we don't have to argue about a thing if nobody's opposing us, but now we feel threatened, and so we've got to fight back, right? Unfortunately, history is not a thing, like we're not observing natural processes here. We can't say that things are just going to go in one direction, because that's not what history does. It just goes all over the place. And I don't know what the impact is of the conflict. Certainly, as people argue about it more in public, as we've had, very religiously themed political rallies going on. And of course, as we had the December 6th conflict over the Capitol in 2021, people have become more polarized. So they're probably, those two ends are growing and the middle is shrinking. That's just my guess. I still suspect that strong advocates for Christian nationalism are going to be in the minority, but we're going to have a larger number of those people willing to take direct action about it, because it's been brought into prominence. And where we go in politics doesn't necessarily exactly reflect what the straight out majority opinion in the United States is, because you get people into positions where they get to make decisions, specifically state legislatures, which are overwhelmingly in the political conservative side. So we may have a shift toward Christian nationalism and social conservatism for a while, even if it doesn't reflect the demographic opinion, the majority opinion in the United States. I don't know.
Wow, thank you. That was very nuanced.
All right, thank you so much, Bjorn, for that question. And yeah, Dan, what do you have to contribute to this conversation?
Thank you, Terry. Thank you, Professor Laura. Bjorn sort of jumped on where I was going on a question of where this all goes, and the Christian nationalism I consider in a pot of controversial social issues that have changed over the course of my lifetime, which spans the last half of the 20th century and up till today. Things like racism, sexism, abortion, the religious question. These things weren't talked about much when I was a child. They weren't dealt with very well until I started to get older. But they've become part of the national conversation. Now, they're still controversial and there's a lot of kickback, but my question was going to be, where you saw it going, and you don't know exactly, I guess, is what you're saying. But it seems to me that the younger generation is more accepting of gay and lesbian rights, trans rights, things that weren't even in the conversation before. Racism certainly still plays a huge role, especially historically, in what it's wrought for today, but it's talked about and it's thought about. My question, I don't know how soon it happens, but I'm rather optimistic that some of these things turn out in a way we think they should, a more Christian, more Jesus-like Christian approach to accepting others, including others' religions and others' ethnicities. I don't know how long it'll take, and I may be long gone before we see that happening, but I'm kind of optimistic in the general sense that it goes. This is a good a good forum for you to raise this. I'm not sure a lot of people want to hear the fact that, discussing these things, that their side is not right, but is just part of an evolution or part of a current movement. The Christian nationalism seems a little bit recent in my life. The ones that are most strident and the ones that are most politically vocal. But the fact is, I'm just not that worried about it in the long run. Or what I am worried about is sort of the people that are getting hurt by it currently. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say on the soapbox. But my question was going to be where you saw this. They're all going. Can you see a rainbow at the end of the road here?
Well, I have to say, it feels like cheating, but it's really not. I'm a Seventh-day Adventist, and I still have this Adventist belief that says there's definitely the rainbow. It kind of feels like a cop-out to say I'm looking forward to the second coming, but I am really looking forward to the second coming. There have been times when our church community has tried to ignore social things and work on ourselves because the second coming is going to fix all of these problems for us. But for the most part, we've been kind of optimistic premillennialists, saying that we're going to do what we can to preserve religious liberty in this space, so that for as long as possible, the United States can fulfill its promises of giving liberty and freedom to all people, because this will preserve a space for sharing our faith here. As for the political system working itself out, I don't want to be okay, there's no fix for us but the second coming voice. I don't want to say that because we've been expecting the second coming for a really, really long time, it feels like to us now, right? And if we want to go back in history, yeah, they were expecting it in the New Testament time too. I don't know how much time we have, and we've got to do the good that we can anyway. So I don't know exactly what we're going to go through in the meantime. I do believe that you're right. Younger generations are not interested in, say, narrowly defining gender or narrowly defining family. They have fairly progressive social values right now. I know political conservatives blame us at their colleges for that, and to that I always say, if I had so much influence over young people's values, I could at least get them to read my syllabus for my class. But what's happening is that they come to college and they meet other young people and they just see other people's experiences, and they get a more diverse view of the world. So yeah, I do think that we're not going to have a Handmaid's Tale sort of circumstance here. I don't think we're going to go into full tilt dystopia about Christian nationalism and an authoritarian state. I do believe we're going to have continued political conflict for a while. And honestly, that I'm not sure, where that's going to go, if that's going to clear up anytime soon or be able to be pushed off to the sideline. The sense of a shared culture kind of goes away. I tell students that mass media creates mass culture, and this is how we get this kind of shared identity together. Nationalism is even aided by the printing press because people can all be reading the same thing. But in our online spaces, we're in very divided spaces now, and so being able to come to a cultural consensus and apply that to our political process, that one I'm not sure where we're going with. I realize this is a really contorted answer. I wish I had a simple answer. I think that just like, we don't go constantly more to the left-hand side of the political spectrum. We're not going to go forever to the right-hand side of the political spectrum. I'm hoping our darting back and forth is not going to, be an absolutely every 4 years phenomenon, and that we won't have presidencies that try to be the opposite of one another continuously. But yeah, I don't think that we're going into a full right-wing dystopia here. I guess that's the best I can come up with for you. I hate to try and predict the future.
Well, thank you. My hope is that the controversies we're still going through represent the death throes of some of the old ideas that are destructive to so many folks. And I'm hoping that America makes a change for the better, because culturally and in a lot of ways has been a leader in the world, in world opinion. So I still have some optimism going. Thanks very much.
Thank you to Dan for that question, and Linda and Laura for kind of finding your way around how do we really deal with that. But you did say in the beginning that it's unfair to ask history to answer some of these questions. So but we'll definitely see how it goes. Karen, welcome. Please join the conversation.
Thank you very much, Sharon. My question is twofold. First of all, how are you being received at Walla Walla University? And then second, what is happening among these two groups, the administration in Washington, the Adventist administration in Washington, D.C., and the general Adventist population on these issues that seem to be really directly well, the question is, I grew up fourth generation Adventist, and I was always terrified of other religions that would come after me and put me in jail and kill me. Now, how does that all fit in today with what's happening with nationalism? What is a general average Adventist thinking about this? I'm not talking about AT people. I know where most of you stand, and I'm with you. But what's happening out there in Adventism is my question.
Okay. Well, teaching at Pacific Union College, I am in Northern California, and we tend to be something of an estuary, a place where the tidewaters mix. We've got some very conservative voices, both religiously and politically, and we do probably have more, yeah, I like to use the word progressive, but that pretty much gives away my perspective too. We're probably more left-leaning here in general. As for the Adventist population, I'm afraid to say it, but I get the feeling that for the average member, your perspective on this is going to follow your local politics. The Seventh-day Adventist Church has historically been opposed to too tight of cooperation between Christianity and the state. We're in favor of religious liberty. We're afraid of Christianizing America. And because of that, we've been willing to support religious liberty, particularly for those in the minority. That was our stance. I'm not sure, somewhere in the last century, the evangelical world has created a mass media machine, Christian bookstores, Christian radio, talk shows, books, the children's programming, this sort of thing. And the Seventh-day Adventist churches probably talked less about politics. So I believe your average Seventh-day Adventist is hearing about faith in politics, not from Adventist sources, but from evangelical sources. They might listen to Christian talk radio on their drive to work or home. The people that they're reading are evangelical authors, or might be their kids are watching stuff made by evangelicals. So I think we kind of pick that up. There's also this kind of general community values we get. So So in our rural areas, we're going to be more politically conservative and more comfortable with Christian nationalism. A little while back, somebody was talking about a particular conservative Adventist media personality claiming that he was a Christian nationalist and that thought it was a good thing, and that was all positive. I don't think your North American division leadership is going to be in agreement generally, but kind of has to walk carefully because we've got such a diverse, politically diverse demographic, and at this point, I believe the political loyalties are more likely to be leading than the denominational loyalties are. I talked about this at the end of my class on international religious nationalism. I called it Holy Wars. And when I came to the end, I was walking carefully. I had actually a couple of students in there that I knew were kind of feeling like maybe Christian nationalism wasn't a bad thing, right? So I don't want to like steamroller over them and blame them, but I don't think it's a good thing. And I don't as a Seventh-day Adventist particularly. And it was helpful to be able to walk them through Adventists' historic views and give a historic perspective. I can't do that for most of the world church or the US church. So yeah, I believe Adventist leaders are still generally going to be opposed to Christian nationalism. I don't know, whatever their personal politics are, but are being very circumspect in what they're saying because they know that for the average person in the pews, your perspective on this goes along with your political convictions.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Karen. Ed Zerkwitz, please go ahead and join the conversation.
Yes, thank you for taking on this interesting topic. My wife and I recently read a book called How the South Won the Civil War. Subheading was Oligarchy, Democracy, and the Continuing Fight for the Soul of America, published in 2020 by Heather Cox Richardson. And one of the things she points out is that, or one of the things she does is debunk the myth that the Civil War released the nation from the grip of oligarchy, expunging the sins of the founding. So if you go back to American history or the founding of American history, we have the idea that these second sons were leaving the first sons generally got the economic benefits of being in the family or the company or what, well, business, trade, whatever. And so they came to America to seek freedom of religion, but also at the same time, they came to America to have economic prosperity. And so this part of this was the link between religion and oligarchy, the beginnings of oligarchy, because you couldn't be an oligarch unless you enslaved or subordinated, like indentured servants, for example, certain farmers and so forth, local Indians, and Black people later on. You couldn't become an oligarch unless you subordinated and enslaved a lot of people, and that gave you the wealth to become an oligarch. So her book is really a history of the United States up until 2020. And the oligarchy never disappeared. And the and subordination, at least, and if you want to use the term loose enslavement, really didn't disappear. We have oligarchs in national Christianity. And so I don't know if you've given some thought to that, but how much influence does national Christianity have, or the oligarchs within it? Because that gets passed down by generation or commonality through the ages, so to speak, or the ages of American history. So how much of that elitism, control, oligarchy is there in national Christianity? Do you have a thought on that?
Well, I'm certainly intrigued by the book that you mentioned, and I thank you for that recommendation. I will be on the lookout for that. I haven't gotten a lot of thought, I realize, to the role of oligarchy in Christianity. In most every society, I can say that wealth and power tend to go along with one another, so it makes perfect sense that it would. Certainly in politics, there are advantages politically for having generational wealth. You're going to have better access to education, more connections, a better chance to, say, run for office. And of course, you're more likely to have the ear of people who are in office. If you're not, I suspect you're going to have the same dynamic is at work in Christian communities. Certain people have the education, the connections, and the funding, and all of those probably based out of the funding, and so they're going to get more influence. So it sounds quite plausible, and I'm intrigued by the book.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks, Ed. Ray, Bobby, please go ahead and join the conversation. I saw some comments in the chat, so I'm interested to hear what you want to talk about today.
Well, I think it's kind of interesting when we talk about Adventism and Christian nationalism. You would think that there's going to be a lot of differences of opinion amongst Adventists, depending upon how you believe in the church's teachings. Because as a conservative organization, you're being taught, and it is the stated effort of teaching you what to believe. And now you got this battle going on. You say, but I don't want the government to teach me what to believe or think. You have already trained your mind to follow someone else rather than thinking on and deciding for yourself. So I see much of religion facing that issue. So if you're conservative, I think the tendency is going to go along with what the government may tell you. If you've got 2 or 3 things that say, well, I believe the same way, so they must be right. So to me, the real issue in Adventism is, in any conservative, are you going to give up this being told what to believe and decide what do I believe and why? Because you just say the government has no reason to tell us what to believe. Why would we choose someone else to tell us what to believe? And our organization tells us in so many ways what you should believe. We've done that for ages. We're not different from other cultures of conservative. But I think a lot of Adventists will follow what's happening right now simply because they're used to being told what to believe. And it's going to be a real battle to say, what do I do with all this? What do you think?
I think that I believe that there are no power structures that especially benefit from encouraging people to engage in really nuanced, deep thinking, that our political systems, just like any other system, try to simplify issues, smash them down into neat black or white boxes because that motivates us to vote. our religious communities, I think, sometimes try to simplify things for us also, because it's just comforting to have clearly this is what's right. The Seventh-day Adventist Church does encourage education, and education opens our eyes to complexity. And that may or may not be really intended by leadership or encouraged by it. It kind of depends on who your leaders are. And honestly, I don't want to classify them all in the same box, because I've had some leaders and some people I know in the organization who I believe are incredible advocates for critical thinking and acknowledge the nuanced nature of reality that we have to deal with. So yeah, there's a human tendency to want a simple answer, and so a number of people are going to be comfortable if someone will just tell them what the answer is, whether that's a religious voice or a political voice, and they're going to have undivided loyalty. And I will say that when I look at politics, you know, I'm right now, most recently been voting Democrat. That I'm more comfortable with that. But I have not made that my political party because I see very similar, you know, oversimplification, polarization, logical fallacies, the same sort of things being used rhetorically on both sides of our political spectrum. And I would not want to fully identify myself and surrender my moral judgment to a political entity whose main purpose is to be elected into office and to hold power. I certainly wouldn't want to do that with a religious organization either. So I respect your thoughts here. And
Well, that follows up though with, and maybe it's just my own view of things, but I see both the political side and the religious side about control. You want to control a group for whatever reason. And it's almost like, to me, religion needs to be rethought as to what it is and what it means. Because you say religion and you think of a belief system. And that belief system is an exclusionary one. It's the same way of politics. I mean, the similarities are astounding. I think there needs to be a rethinking of everything, but hey, probably not going to happen.
that is the conundrum. Whenever we define ourselves, to define something is to put lines around it, and then you've put everything else on the outside. So to be able to do that in a healthy way rather than an exclusionary or a judgmental way is always a conundrum. I agree.
All right, thanks so much, Ray. George, always interesting to hear your perspective. What do you want to share with us today?
Okay, thank you again, Professor, for this presentation. It's the second time I watch it, and it's always a very good one. A commentator early on said something about that you missed mentioning the Jews and the left. And of course, that was not the title of your presentation. And I'm glad you are focusing on the side that is the religious side and political side that is a threat to our democracy. Unfortunately, we don't have a democracy anymore. In less than 100 days, we don't have a true democracy in place anymore. It has been destroyed already. Some people appear to be naive and or ignorant about it, I don't know, but we don't live in a democracy anymore. So it's important to focus on groups that are undermining our democracy. And in Christian nationalism is so closely related to the fascist regime that we are in now, that your presentation is very significant. At the end of the day, what is at stake here is our personal freedoms and our democracy. That's the only thing that I'm an immigrant. I came to this country for democracy and for freedom, and look what I have now. So it's very important to educate people, and that's exactly what you are doing. So I felt that I need to express my words of appreciation and support to your presentation, because it's educational, and I hope I wish people could listen more attentively to it and learn from your presentation and be able to make amends to their political behavior, because it seems that many Adventists still think that MAGA stands for making Adventism great again, and it's not. It's something that's destroying their own freedom in this country. So keep preaching, Professor. You are doing a great job, and I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, I can certainly not quibble with such kind praise. I agree that this last 100 days has certainly had dramatic impacts on what we're doing, how government functions right now. I'm actually trying to rework my Intro to U.S. Government class for next fall, and I kind of feel like I need to hold off on some of it because some of the political structures and processes may look different by then, but it's unclear depending on how the rest of the system is going to respond to the executive branch, what actually comes out of it. So I try not to get too pessimistic too fast because there a number of these particular things happening need to go through a process of court challenges. We'll see what comes out. I do believe that most of all, I want to say that whatever happens in the political system, it's important that our faith is not about our politics. Now, my faith, I want it to motivate the way I vote because I see voting as an act by which I can care for my neighbor. This is what I hope for it to be. But I want to keep things in the right order. And that's what I hope to communicate to my students. Your values first, and then your political choices out of that.
Thank you.
And thank you, George. Really appreciate your perspective each week. David, please go ahead and join the conversation.
Well, I want to do two things. First, thank you for this wonderful presentation from which I've learned a lot. And also thank you for serving at my alma mater. Second thing I'd like to do is to make 3 suggestions as to how Christians can properly affect the political life of a nation. First, I think in their own community, Christians can model what they hope the whole nation will be like. Secondly, I think Christians can practice civil disobedience in resistance to laws that they find unhelpful, unchristian, and so forth. And thirdly, I think Christians can participate in the public discussion of policy issues and try to persuade the public as a whole. I think going beyond that might be too much coercion, but in those 3 ways, I think the Christian community can make a positive impact on the community as a whole. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I like those suggestions. I certainly approve of them. There's a saying that all politics is local. I believe it's true in my church community. I don't have much sway over what happens, say, at the general conference, but my local church community is a healthy and supportive place, and I'm very happy for it. What I believe for the whole, I should believe for my part of it, and that's where I have influence. I also like the idea that our political community is in a conversation. And that means not only am I going to try and use my influence there, I'm going to make sure that I've listened properly to my neighbors so that everybody picks perspectives and even policies that they approve based on something that makes sense to them. I need to understand that too. Thank you.
All right, thank you, David. Appreciate you joining the conversation. Marian, you are up next. What do you want to share with us today?
Hello, greetings to everyone. Thanks for letting me in. Greetings from Ukraine, specifically from Lviv, Ukraine. And as you all well know, we are on the receiving end of another holy war, which is in part waged under the pretext of defending traditional values, which is very ironical because for many decades, Ukraine has been the Bible Belt of the former Soviet Union and the Bible Belt of Europe. And then that's not an exaggeration because of probably one of the largest religious communities in general and Protestant communities included. And so my question to Professor Laura would be, how do you find, is it likely in the nearest future that the traditional republicanism in the style of, let's say, Ronald Reagan or George W. Bush, that it can revive? What do you think about it? What are the odds? Thank you.
Oh boy, I don't have any odds there, but I have hopes. Not because I lean toward that political perspective, but because I believe our political systems ought to be in balance. They ought to represent everyone well, and they should do it in a way that is respectful, evidence-driven, values-based. I'm afraid that United States politics has become more of a team sport. You know, we just cheer to win rather than because we want to accomplish something together. And I believe that that model for the Republican Party was better situated to try and to accomplish something. Unfortunately, I'm afraid that our political parties are mostly in the business of trying to get in office and stay in office. And that sounds, I know I'm rather pessimistic there. It is really meaningful to me to hear a voice from Ukraine, from where you are. I'm not sure how to respond to it. I feel like I should be asking you some more questions about, I know US politics has a huge impact on the international community, but probably on Ukraine more than most others. And I wish our political system weren't functioning like this for us, but for everyone else, and for communities like yours in particular.
Thank you very much.
And thank you to Marian for joining the conversation. Really appreciate your questions and perspective. At this time, usually around the 3:30 mark, Lauren would give us an update on what's coming next, kind of like we're officially wrapping up, and then we'll continue the conversation in the foyer afterwards. So Lauren, please go ahead.
Yeah, I'm so pleased that Laura was able to be here today. You all have to agree, she's an extraordinary teacher. And she, every time we have her, I'm just so pleased with what she presents. And next week, we have the inimitable Reinder Rinsma will be with us. And he hasn't given me a topic yet, and I apologize for that. But then the week after that, we have another of our favorite teachers, Michael Schofield. Michael is going to be talking about the golden age of Adventist missions. And I don't think we've had a missions topic here for a long time. So this should be interesting. And then let's see, in May, I've got Don McAdams coming. Used to be a president of Southwestern College, I think maybe, has been out of church work for a while, but is back again doing scholarship on Ellen White. And so I asked him what he's going to talk about, and he said, well, it's going to be about Ellen White and how the church regards her. On the 17th, I have Dr. Olive Hemmings scheduled. She's another of our favorite. And then on the 24th, I'm pleased to have a new teacher. One of my goals is always to give some time to newer, younger people who we don't know as well. And that person is going to be Dr. Landon Schnabel. And Landon is a sociologist. He's going to talk about the whole origin of churches and how churches change and how they grow between different stages from one stage to the other, and start out as a small group, as a sect, and later turn into something much more formal. And so that should be interesting. So I'm very pleased. I've got some new teachers coming up, and I'm always happy when we can do that. I will remind you again that this is the midst of our spring fundraiser, and we only do this a few times a year, and we hate to talk about it, but at the same time, we like to, because we feel like we're proud of what we're doing, and we make no apologies for giving you good content, not perfect, but good, and our best. So keep that in mind as you think about your giving. That's all, Cherry Ann. I think I've covered it all. Bjorn, covered it okay?
I am unmuted. I thought you did that excellently, Lauren. Thank you. And it's always good to delegate out the fundraising pitches, but no, we're very, very grateful for all the support, guys. I was just saying, Cherry Ann had one of my favorite reflections recently in the last week on Adventist Today, and she talked about being able to be Adventist in a different way, and to have open conversation. And it shouldn't feel this way, but it does feel like a rare treat to be able to have open conversation. It kills me that, just saying those words, but this really is a special space. And so I'm grateful to be connected with it, and I want to do all I can to keep it growing, keep it going. So thank you for supporting it, everyone.
All right, and thanks for that. Yeah, well, you did ask me to write my personal reflection, so that's all I did. And I'm, really grateful for A Today and the space that's been created here. So Ed, I see no other hands, so you get to ask the last question, unless, of course, something pricks Lauren's mind since he's now back with us. But Ed, please go ahead. What is on your mind today?
Hi, Ed.
Well, hi, I'm very sorry to have missed the presentation. We have an Adventist church nearby that actually celebrates Easter. So we went to that service this morning. I want to pick up on points made by Ray Stovall and Dave Larson. By the way, if you follow Dave Larson and Stigvi Tonstad, who was on with us earlier, on Facebook, they talk about this subject quite a bit. It's always in the human heart, it seems like, that there's this desire for power and control, and manifests itself more strongly in some people than others. And it emerges all through history, this desire for power and control. And today, it seems to me, we have a confluence of a president who really wants control. He doesn't want to be hampered by niceties or precedents or even the Constitution. As we speak, he is testing the boundaries of the Constitution. Many people who are close observers think it's all about power and control. And then we have this confluence of that president with a wing of Christianity that wants control. They want to control our culture and our morality, and probably other things as well. And it's a nasty combination, this confluence. Even though they're very unlikely partners, it would seem. So this raises a question for me is, given the situation we're in, how should an Adventist react? What should an Adventist do? I have a landscape architect. She's a woman of few words, except she called me the other day and went on at length about how worried and how upset she is over the political situation, that she is participating in as many public demonstrations as she possibly can against what's happening. She's calling politicians and writing politicians constantly. So she is engaged in trying to resist. That's her mode of operation, is resistance. And I can imagine there are Adventists, on the other hand, who say, this is cool. This is going to bring on the end much sooner. Bring it on. I happen not to be one of those, but I know there are. Which kingdom do we really react to right now? Are we in the camp that says, this is just a sign of the end, let's have it? Or are we in the camp that's like my landscape architect that wants to resist and be an activist, actually? Where do we go? What do we do?
Great question, Ed. I enjoy our conversations in the chat on Faith and Reason of a Sabbath morning. I certainly can't tell you what to do with your politics. I can tell you that the Adventist Church has been dealing with this question essentially from its inception, that we had arguments about whether Adventists should give their time and their money to the abolitionist cause, because many of our early leaders did. Others said that, by this reading of Revelation, we believe that slavery is going to exist, terrible as it is, until the end of time. And so we need to give our efforts to sharing our message, because when Jesus comes the second time, it's going to fix the social problems, right? That's the ultimate reform. And they've gone in this conversation for ages since then. However, in the later 1800s, the church took a decided shift that they were going to engage in the political process for the purpose of defending religious liberty. That perhaps restrictions of religious liberty, the American Reform Association was trying to get the U.S. declared a Christian nation and to put that into the Constitution and to put Christian religions explicitly in schools and such, and and protect Sunday worship, right? Sunday rest. And the Adventist Church said that, okay, we can this might bring the end of time sooner, but we believe that there's still more good we should do in the world. And so we want to protect religious liberty for as long as possible. As pessimistic as the church always was about losing religious liberty eventually, we said, well, we want to also try to keep it for as long as possible for the sake of sharing the gospel about the end coming. So I will say that if you want an Orthodox Adventist response to that question, that's the one that I would go with, that it's in everybody's best interest that we try to protect the rights and freedoms of others for as long as possible, because that serves the gospel best, better than saying let's run along with anything that we believe might hasten the end of the world. So that's what I would go with. Honestly, we have seen through, a couple hundred years that we just don't know how soon the end is coming. Jesus' statements about the signs of the end are like the beginning birth pangs of labor. I've been in labor, and starting labor, just because you know it's happening doesn't mean you know when it's ending, right? You just know it's going to end. And I still, as a Seventh-day Adventist, believe the world is going to end, but I don't have any particular faith in my knowledge of how fast that's going to happen. So you're going to have to pick your politics, but certainly I would pick that. Use what influence you want to use in the way that you believe is going to do the most good for the most of your neighbors.
I want to pick up on your last point. People have been saying Jesus is coming soon for 2,000 years. And we're latecomers to that game. We've only been saying it for nearly 200. And I just wonder if we shouldn't act as though we don't know when he's coming. He may come tomorrow. He may come in 1,000 years. And build the kingdom of heaven on earth as Jesus talked about. And in that case, I feel like I want the society I live in to be as free and as humane as possible. So I would lean toward resistance.
All right. Thank you so much, Ed. Really appreciate your thoughts. So Lauren, you get to have the last question, comment. Oh, you're still muted.
I did that too.
Laura, I wish I had been here for all of it. I was in the other room preaching. We had a nice Easter service here at Glendale City, which is my church. And we talked about being rejoined with those whom we love someday. My question is kind of related to Ed's, actually, and you may have answered it, and that is that I always wondered how to deal with these matters as a pastor. It was a tiptoe thing, and it could get pretty delicate, get pretty difficult to know how to talk about these things. You see injustice happening. The one place you could get away with it was to filter it all through eschatology, through the great controversy model. And say, okay, if we talk about eschatology, then we can talk about how bad the world's getting. But if that's a very narrow filter, actually. It only lets you talk about the end of Sabbath keeping, for example, or the remnant church being attacked. You really can't talk about things like political ethics. You really can't talk about character. Character doesn't really play a part in here. You really can't talk about, you can talk to some extent about religious liberty, but even that is eroding away. It's very hard to stand in front of any given congregation and assume that religious liberty means the same thing to them as it means to you. And I think what it means to me is probably something fairly traditional, going back to the beginning of the church, that we have liberty that we defend the liberty of everyone to worship as they will. That's not always the case anymore. You can have a whole congregation where most of the people are not in favor of giving religious liberty to Muslims, say. So I would say that for pastors, it's become very complicated. I would love to hear from others who have done that work. I feel like, I'm not preaching regularly anymore, except the time I spend with you guys, but it's very hard. I feel like I'm, walking on one rail of a railroad track and trying to not to fall off whenever I'm called to talk about that. So just an observation, Laura. Have a thought for all of you. Have a thought for your pastor and the complicated room he's stepping into or she's stepping into during this time of political distress.
Mhm. I agree, because even if perhaps our national political leaders aren't modeling it, leadership is really supposed to be about leading everybody, which means you need to have a relationship with everybody. You cannot afford to take the portion of the congregation or the organization that disagrees with you and throw them under the bus.
Yeah.
And say you're just wrong and terrible people. You are going to have to lead in a way that you can embrace everybody, even if you want to promote certain perspectives and lead people in a certain direction. And you're also right that while I've been bandying about the term religious liberty here, what I haven't said is that there's a difference between embracing religious liberty to protect the rights of the minority, or embracing it to protect the rights of the majority against them. And Seventh-day Adventism began with a very strong self-awareness of being the minority. The Sabbath was a flag that the whole world could see, and other beliefs. And so we knew we were the minority. And so it made sense to protect the rights of the minority. As the United States becomes more and more religiously diverse, and as we get sunk deeper into this general evangelical culture machine here, it's much easier for Seventh-day Adventists to identify ourselves with the majority, with the evangelical voices, and then feel like oppression is when I have to use culturally sensitive language to talk about holidays, or about sexuality, or something like that, and then
I never would have guessed, Laura, that the new flag that would divide the church would be whether or not you can get medical care. I mean, we've had minor skirmishes with the reproductive technology and reproductive care, but the Jehovah's Witnesses, of course, pioneered the idea that you have the freedom to get the medical care you want, which is very complicated without taking blood transfusions. The whole thing of not getting vaccinations has become the flag for a certain subset, and you will hear about it at the General Conference session. It will come up from the floor. It will be shouted from the floor, freedom to not have vaccinations. Never would have guessed that. That was a surprise to me as the cause celeb. Wasn't it to you? I mean, it just seemed.
Certainly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we talk about rights and liberties and such, and we forget to put in the conversation the issues of power dynamics, and believe that it's as important to protect the sensitivities of the people in the majority as to protect the people in a minority situation, ignoring the fact that the harm done to the one group is going to be so much greater than the one that can be done to the other.